Welcome back to question period. Yes, as usual, Pierre Paul is asking the first question in French.
Prime Minister did not fire his Minister
As
of
he seems to
Public
do
Safety.
every day. I don't know
Public
why, but
Safety
welcome back
as
to question
minister who
period
is misleading and
with the
incompetent.
witty and
Here's
insightful
why.
analysis
Because
of
the
your
Prime
host,
Minister
David Krayden.
himself is the one who
This
approved
is another
the
feature
transfer
of the
of
Krayden's
Paul
Right
Bernardo
channel.
to a minimum security
And
prison with more freedoms and more
stand on
comforts
guard
in that prison. The Prime Minister
David.
is in
I
Ottawa
hope you're
today.
standing on guard too,
So
because we
does
need
he have the courage
as
to
much help
stand
as we
up
can
and
get these
explain
days.
to the victims of Paul Bernardo why he wanted to give more
Because
freedoms
lots
and
of questions
comforts to
about
that
Paul Bernardo,
monster?
but nothing about Ukraine.
The
You
honorable
notice that?
government leader in the House. Mr. Speaker, the crimes
No controversy
in
about
question
how
were
everybody hates Paul
despicable,
Bernardo. But the
unspeakable.
Conservatives haven't got the
There are no
stomach or
words
the
to
gut
describe how awful it
to
was.
bring up Ukraine and how
Everyone
Trudeau's
in
given away
Canada was
another
affected by
$500 million
these crimes.
and made us a
The
guarantor
families were
of their
traumatized
safety.
by these crimes.
Not a word from the opposition. Not a peep of
The
dissent.
Prime Minister.
Not a hint of
Well,
protest.
first, Mr. Speaker, I would
We're going
like
to go
to
through
say
another
that
half hour
the
about something
Correctional
everybody
Service of
agrees
Canada
with.
is
Yes,
fully
Paul Bernardo
independent,
probably shouldn't
and we
be in a
cannot have
medium
political
security prison.
interference in our corrections.
Why the Prime Minister refuses to fire his
But I can tell you,
incompetent and misleading
the events in
public
Ukraine
safety
are having a
minister.
greater
And
effect
it is that
on
the
more
Prime Minister
Canadians
himself
and could
was
potentially
the one
engulf
who
the world in a
accepted
war.
the transfer of Paul
You hear Pierre
Bernardo
Poilievre talking
from
about
a
that?
maximum
No.
security prison to a medium security prison where he would have
Nice and
access
safe.
to human
Nice
interaction,
and safe.
more freedom, and more comfort. His office knew 3 months beforehand, and his cabinet has the power to direct the correctional authorities to keep mass murderers in maximum security prisons. Will the Prime Minister show the courage to stand on his feet and explain to victims of Paul Bernardo why he wanted to give this monster more freedom and comfort?
Yes.
The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, the idea that anybody in this House would have any sympathy for the monstrous acts that were committed is absolutely repugnant. The second thing that I will say, Mr. Speaker, is that it's unfortunate that the Leader of the Opposition mischaracterized what happened. He knows very well that Correctional Services Canada makes those decisions independently. He knows very well as well, Mr. Speaker, that we have a system we're not supposed to interfere politically with that. Mr. Speaker, it is true in March that staff were informed of the possibility. It wasn't until that possibility was confirmed that they informed the Prime Minister at the end of May.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Based on that account, the Prime Minister knew the day of the transfer, and his office knew 3 months earlier. The government has in the past issued directives to correction services on what should be done with various classes of prisoners, like by forcing those with contraband into dry prison cells, for example. In other words, they do have the power to direct corrections on these issues. The Prime Minister and his office knew for 3 months. Given that he's here in Ottawa today, does he have the courage to explain
we've got
his
the Prime
decision
Minister
to
in
let this
Ottawa today.
monster go out of a
Well, I hope
maximum
we
security
raise the question about
penitentiary?
firing female ministers. It's the only kind Trudeau likes to fire.
Opposition officer, who I know cares as deeply about the gravity of those crimes and the impact on the families
this
as
is
I
just
do.
pathetic.
I know he cares as deeply
This
about
back and
what
forth
we're
is
going to
just
do for
pathetic.
Canadians on that. I also know that he knows the independent.
Yes, we
independence
all
of our
hate Paul
correctional
Bernardo.
services system.
Can
I
we
know
get
that he
on to
also
something
knows that we're not supposed
else,
to interfere
please?
politically, and so I would ask him to work collaboratively with us to find a way where we don't politicize Correctional Services Canada, and we work together to make sure that the families who are impacted in crimes of this nature are taken care of, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I look across at the Prime Minister's seat. I know that he is in Ottawa today, and if he had the courage, he would be standing to
Oh,
answer
he's
these
not in
questions
QP.
directly.
He's in Ottawa today.
I just want to remind the honourable members.
Courage
Can't do
goes both ways, Pierre.
indirectly what we do directly. So let him continue.
And I take the House Leader up on his challenge to work with us. We have a bill that would make sure every mass murderer stays in a maximum security penitentiary. It's before the House. Will the government pass it with unanimous consent today?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
So first of all, Mr. Speaker, I would say that I look directly at the Leader of the Official Opposition for a reason. I look at him for a reason because when we're dealing with something as serious and as brutal as the crimes that occurred in a community that was right next to mine, that I felt viscerally that the conversation that we have has to be measured. It has to be based on cooperation. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, based on the underlying premise that every member cares equally and deeply about this, about two things, about the victims, absolutely, but also about not politicizing our correctional services system.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I take the House Leader at his word that he is equally horrified with this monster and that he wants to do something. But I take him at his word when he says he wants to work with us to reverse this transfer and put this monster back in a maximum security penitentiary. The good news is that he can do that today. The Conservative member for Niagara Falls, who represents many of the family and friends of the victims, has a bill that would ensure that every single mass murderer stays in a maximum security penitentiary forever. Will the government commit to passing it with unanimous consent and send Paul Bernardo back to maximum security penitentiary?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we are in all instances ready to have a conversation about how we don't politicize our correctional services, about how we ensure that we take care of victims and their families. And Mr. Speaker, there is a review of the decision that was made by Correctional Services. It's going to be completed in 2 weeks. I would suggest that we take a look at that. And I would also suggest that when we're dealing with something as major as changing our correctional services system, that it deserves discussion. It deserves the ability for it to be examined by all parliamentarians and to make sure that we don't create.
They will not consider
consequences, Mr.
the
Speaker.
Conservative bill.
L'Honorable Député de
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, a commission of inquiry into Chinese interference must be established before the end of the session. Why? Because investigations take time, and we've already wasted too much
Well,
time.
this is a
If we want
relevant
to reassure
question
the
here.
public, we need to get to the bottom of the interference in the last elections before the
All of
next
this is just
election. That is
varying
the only way to assure the public of
Chinese
the
election
probity of the
interference
next federal election. So I appeal to my colleagues' statesmanship. Time is running
The
out.
Liberals love
Will
it.
they
They
announce
just
a public
love
and
it.
independent
Everybody's
commission of
talking
inquiry
about
before the
Bernardo,
end of
and
the
no one's
session?
talking about Chinese election interference because
The
they want
Honourable
this to
Public
go
Safety
away
Minister.
before the House convenes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very encouraged by the exchanges between my colleague, the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs, and the Bloc Québécois and the NDP. I hope that conversations will occur with the Conservatives as well. This fight, the fight against foreign interference, is not a partisan one. We need to do this work together. That way, we can create new powers, we can add resources. This will help in the fight against foreign interference, and that's what's most important.
Oh,
The
Mendicino
Honourable
got
Member
up
for
on that
Saint-Jean.
one.
Mr. Speaker, at this point, my colleagues will have understood that the Bloc Québécois will not let this one go. The public's trust in democracy is at stake. The public is calling for a public and independent commission of
The
inquiry.
Bloc won't let it
Its
go.
commissioner must be approved by this House. And the commission will have to report on its work not in 5 years, not in 2 years, but in the next few months. It's a huge undertaking, Mr. Speaker. We know that. That's why we're working with the government. The government knows that it's a huge undertaking too. We have our work cut out for us. So will the government announce this commission? The Honourable Minister. First, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for her teamwork. The option of a public inquiry is still an option on the table, as my colleague is currently negotiating with the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. What's most important is that we work together with Canadians in order to create new authorities to protect not only our democratic institutions, but Canadians themselves too.
Burnaby.
Le ministre de la Sécurité.
The Public Safety Minister, the President of the Privy Council, the Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister, what do they all have in common? Well, apparently they're all unable to read their emails. It's becoming a dangerous trend. Is this government aware of the trauma that it is
God, Peter Julian looks
making
old.
the victims' families relive? They were victims of one of the worst killers in Canadian history. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, absolutely, these crimes were probably the worst in Canada. They're incredibly serious. But it's also very important to note that our correctional service must be independent. We received information that there
sure
was a possibility
where they're
that the
going with
individual
this.
in question might be transferred, but we only received that information after all the details had been confirmed. That's when the Prime Minister received the information at the end, after.
Now, Mr.
The Honourable Member from New Westminster Burnaby.
After fiasco with this government, the level of disorganization and negligence
Oh,
from Liberal
Justin
ministers
hasn't been
is
around much
often
all week.
appalling. After the Public Security Minister has failed to be informed of the transfer of one of the most brutal criminals in Canadian history, we now know that the Prime Minister's office was informed 3 months ago. They could have used that time to ensure victims' families were warned. How does this keep happening on such serious files? Why are they showing such clear incompetence? When will they fix this?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated, in March, there was staff were informed of the possibility. There were still many details that were not certain. The possibility of a transfer. It wasn't until the end of May, once the details were confirmed, that the Prime Minister was briefed. And what I would say to the member opposite who knows that correctional services is independent and that decisions must not be made with political interference, is I would say to him that we have to have a conversation as a House about how we not interfere with correctional services in Canada, but also make sure that a transfer of this nature doesn't occur. And that needs to be a mature conversation that doesn't involve a lot of politics, Mr. Speaker.
Well, you shouldn't be part of it then if it's a mature conversation.
Mr. Speaker, just when you think things can't get any worse with this Liberal government, the Prime Minister says, hold my beer. For 3 months, because it's a game to this Prime Minister.
She's
That's
good.
what this is. For 3 months, the
Michelle
Public Safety
Ferrari.
Minister knew that child murderer and Scarborough rapist Paul Bernardo was being moved from maximum to medium security prison and did nothing. Now, we know the Prime Minister also knew for 3 months and also did nothing. This isn't a game. Incompetence does not even begin to describe this leadership. Canadians deserve better, and these victims' families deserve better. So, will the Public Safety Minister...
Oh,
The Honourable Government House Leader.
we missed resign there.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the member from Peterborough well, but I do know that
Yeah, she's very concerned about this
she
issue
cares
too.
about
Yes.
these cases, as she would know that the Prime Minister would be deeply impacted as a father and as a Canadian by the horror of these crimes. Any assertion to the opposite, Mr. Speaker, is just frankly not constructive to the debate that we need to have. I've said that correctional services operates independently, that it can't be interfered with politically. I would also say that we have to be very careful when dealing with the victims of crime that we don't politicize that or attempt to use it in a way other than to ask how we stop victims.
The Honourable Member
Liberals
for
lecturing on
Peterborough
politicizing
Claremont.
issues.
If the Prime Minister is
We got a
so
Prime Minister
upset,
running around
why
the
won't he
country saying
stand
parents
up
have
and
no
answer
rights?
this question and talk to the victims' families? If they care so much, then do it. I've said this before. The buck stops with the minister. Stop the blame game. This is people's lives. You are in the government. The Prime Minister, there's no one below that. Again, there is duty here. Either fire the Public Safety Minister or resign. That's it. Those are the options.
I just want to remind the honourable members to place their questions through the chair, not speak directly to each other. The Honourable Government House Leader.
The duty that each of us share as honorable members in this chamber is on behalf of the people that we are fortunate enough to represent, to attempt to the best
What
of
an
our
actor.
ability to keep them safe.
This is one of
to
his
make sure
best
when they are
performances.
harmed
I'll give him
we
that.
do everything in our power to restore
But
them.
he's nothing usually in
And
a
to make
street
sure,
fighter.
yes, Mr. Speaker, that we have a correction system that is free from interference. And why do we say that, Mr.
And now
Speaker?
he's
Because
trying
we
to
have one of
sound
the best
diplomatic.
correctional services
That's
systems
probably the first
in
time
the
in Mark
world.
Holland's
And if
political
we're
life
talking about the
he's ever
rightful
tried to
outrage
sound
that we all
reasonable.
have in this circumstance,
because
we
he's
have to
nothing but a
temper it in
partisan
mature
hound
conversation
at the
how
best
to
of
balance
times.
those two priorities, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, does this Minister of Public Safety expect us to
No,
believe
Leslin,
that for
she's
3
always
months
good.
his
I
office
haven't had her up in a
withheld
while.
information from him about the most notorious murderer and serial rapist in Canada, that he had been transferred to a medium security prison. It's clear the minister likely knew about the transfer in March and did nothing. The entire government likely knew and did nothing about it, including the Prime Minister's office. When will the Prime Minister finally admit that he has lost total control of his cabinet and ask this minister to resign?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by taking a moment to express my support for the families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, who have no doubt been traumatized time and time again by the decision that was taken under Correctional Services Canada. That's why when I found out on May 30th, I took immediate action to reach out to the Commissioner to express those concerns. And I want to work with all members to make sure that this doesn't happen again. The directions that I have put into motion will ensure that I'm directly briefed, and most importantly, that victims are given advance notice before these decisions are taken in the future. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's in town, so why won't he stand and answer these questions? The Minister has misled Canadians before. He has said at least 11 times
You can't
that
say
law enforcement
liar.
requested the Emergencies Act.
You can't say lie.
He said that Bill C-21
They can only say
wasn't
misled.
going to ban guns used by hunters and farmers. That was false. He said that Chinese police stations in Canada had been shut down.
He's convinced they
That
are
was
shut
false.
down.
Canadians have lost confidence in this.
Things
minister.
are as he
So will
believes.
he do the honorable thing and
That's the
just
liberal way.
resign?
Reality is as they want to think it is.
Mr. Speaker, on each and every one of those priorities, this government has defended public safety in the interests of all Canadians. When it comes to fighting against gun violence, we are banning AR-15s. The Conservatives want to make them legal again. When last year we faced an unprecedented national emergency, we invoked the Emergencies Act, a decision which was validated by Judge Rouleau independently. What did the Conservatives do, Mr. Speaker?
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. It's starting the noise level starting to build up again, and we're having
well,
a
keeps
hard
people
time
awake, Anthony.
hearing the answer. The Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk asked a question. She would like to hear the answer. I mean, if there's people yelling behind her,
Well, she's not going to get an
it's
answer.
very difficult for her to hear. So I'm going to ask the Honourable Member, maybe start off about 15
Maybe start
minutes
off
from the end,
again.
or 15 seconds. No, do not take 15 minutes. 15 seconds from the end. If I could have everybody take a deep breath, and now we'll listen to the Minister.
Guy
for
is
15 seconds.
very annoying.
Mr. Speaker, I think all members will be relieved to hear I won't need 15 minutes, but what I will say is when it comes to fighting gun violence, we're banning AR-15s. The Conservatives want to make them legal again. When it came to the
banning
decision to
AR-15s.
invoke the Emergencies Act, Mr. Speaker, we defended that decision to restore public safety. Conservatives were doubling down, encouraging illegal protesters to stay in the region they should have left. We'll always
L'honorable
Little
député.
fat
The Honourable Member
dictator.
for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, Lévis. Hello, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is in Ottawa, but it's interesting because he's not here to answer questions. On the Bernardo case, last week, the Minister of Public Safety feigned surprise about the criminal's transfer from a maximum security prison to a medium security facility. But he had known about it for 3 months, Mr. Speaker. In fact, even the Prime Minister's office knew about it. No one did anything. This is liberal incompetence at its finest. When will the minister resign, Mr. Speaker?
When hell freezes
The Honourable
over.
Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious situation. We are all concerned by this tragedy. But, Mr. Speaker, it is important to remember that our corrections system is independent. It is essential that the decision to transfer an offender is a decision made by Correctional Service of Canada. Now, I know that there's a lot of emotion right now. I feel the same, but we need to. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, he knew that this dangerous criminal would benefit from a less severe prison. He must also have known that this decision would outrage and worry the victims' families. The Minister of Public Safety does not have a very good track record, what with dubious decisions, backtracking, and statements that are not the truth. So if this government has a leader who sees things clearly and is leading in the best interests of Canadians and victims, let him stand up and throw this minister out. The Honorable Public Safety Minister. Mr. Speaker,
Look at this clown.
our thoughts are with the families and close ones of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. On May 30th, when I was informed, I took necessary action. And now there is an independent review of what transpired. It is ongoing. Yesterday, I published new directives for correctional services to ensure that families of victims will be informed in situations like this in the future. The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, don't ask the Minister of Public Safety about Paul Bernardo's transfer. He doesn't know a thing about it, even though his employees knew. Don't ask the Prime Minister either. He doesn't know a thing about it either, even though his staff knew about it. Just like the Prime Minister didn't know about Beijing's threats against a Conservative politician, even though his employees knew about it. For that matter, don't talk to the Minister of Emergency Preparedness either.
This is very good.
He didn't know a thing about it either, even though his staff knew about it. If you want to talk to someone in the know, talk to an employee. So should employees become ministers?
Excellent question.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Bald-faced liar gets up
I
again.
take this issue very seriously.
Yeah.
That's why when
Nobody
I was
takes
informed
you
on
very
May
seriously
30th,
because
I
you're a
took necessary action.
at least three-time
I had
liar,
a frank
and you get caught every time.
conversation with the
You're too
Correctional Services
stupid to even
Commissioner.
cover your own
And
ass.
that's why I made new directives. There will be directives to protect victims' rights. There need to be directives to clarify that. We will work together with
This
all
is
members
a
of this
pathetic
House
excuse
to
for a
protect
member of
victims'
Parliament,
rights and
and
to
an even
make
worse
sensible
excuse
decisions.
for a cabinet minister.
The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane,
But he just
Matapédia.
lumbers through
Mr. Speaker, at this point, it's a pattern.
at the
Ministers are
discretion of a
constantly telling us that
vacuous
they're
prime
not aware of
minister.
briefing notes that the senior civil service confirms were sent directly to those ministers' staff. Mr. Speaker, we can take them at their word that their staff did not see fit to inform them once, maybe twice. But there comes a point where it's the political equivalent of saying, my dog ate my homework. And these ministers are losing their homework quite often. So when are we going to see some real accountability from them? Because we're starting to worry about the health of the dogs eating all that homework.
Okay, my homework. That's good.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
That's the Conservatives could use a bit of that
Mr.
block
Speaker,
wit because
In
they
the current situation,
they sometimes
as I have already explained,
take themselves too seriously.
staff did receive the information.
But
that
this
it
is
was
theater of the
possible
absurd. How Mendicino can
that it
possibly
was a possibility.
deny he knew
They didn't
anything.
receive any
That the
concrete
staff
details
never
of our
tell him
decision. And as
anything.
I've already
He
explained,
never
the
reads any
decision to
emails.
transfer an
He-
incarcerated individual
he works
is an
in an office
independent choice
and knows
made
nothing.
by correctional services. When it was concluded, when it was decided on, then at the end of May, the Prime Minister was informed. That's the truth, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, just because we're laughing doesn't mean it's funny. Ministers have a responsibility to inform themselves and then inform their constituents. Just this spring, in fact, if we had relied on the word of ministers rather than on the reports in the media, 3 members of this House would still be facing threats from China without knowing it. Diplomat Zhao Wei would still be in office. 10 or so constituencies would still be subject to Chinese interference. This is what would have happened without the media if we had relied on ministerial accountability. When will they assume their ministerial responsibilities? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the responsibilities are to identify challenges and then correct course. That's what we did when we issued directives to CSIS. We also issued new directives to Correctional Services Canada in order to correct the situation effectively and efficiently in order to ensure protection of victims' rights and the safety of all.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government put convicted murderer, kidnapper, and child rapist Paul Bernardo into a medium security prison. Meanwhile, if the PM is in Ottawa, why won't he stand up and answer the beloved questions?
Exactly.
In 2013, the Conservative government took responsibility when we were faced with exactly the same issue. Paul Bernardo was to be transferred to medium security prison, and the Conservative government of the day said no. The Public Safety Minister, including the Prime Minister himself, have said yes. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister resign for granting leniency to the most notorious child murderer?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times, as every Canadian knows, the crimes that are in question are amongst the most grievous this country has ever faced. There is not a person who is not impacted by them, who is in this House. I trust that the member cares deeply about it, as do I. But the assertion that this is a decision of the government is false. And it, in fact, is dangerous. The decision to transfer inmates is a decision of Correctional Services Canada. The independence of our correctional service has been a foundation of our country for a very long time. Having a mature conversation about how we respect that and respect victims is what I think Canadians expect.
I just want to point out to the honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, we've heard your comment. You don't have to repeat it over and over again. It's just not the right time. Please talk to your whip about getting a speaking role. The honourable member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
I think it's worth noting that the government has the authority to introduce legislation such as bills the Conservative Party has just put forward to ensure that offenders like Paul Bernardo, one of Canada's worst serial rapists, stay in maximum security. That's their job. The Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister knew about this for 3 months. He has a litany of highly paid staff to tell him about these things. It's preposterous to think that he didn't. His public itinerary today says that he's in the National Capital Region. How come he hasn't informed this House of the Public Safety Minister's resignation?
Yeah, well, Michelle's been up 2 days in a row. Yesterday's question was even better.
Has made it clear, not just now, but for a long time, her desire for her party to be successful and for their party to form this side. They have to do that through an election, Mr. Speaker. But I will say that on this issue, that the decision that was made is independent, and that if we want to have a conversation about Correctional Services Canada's decisions, that's exactly what we're doing. There is a review taking place. It concludes in 2 weeks. We have asked them to review this decision, and I think that understanding that these decisions are done independently is important. It's been an important foundation of corrections in this country.
The honourable member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
This government has had 8 years to consult, and it shouldn't be a leap of logic to understand that re-victimizing families by these serial rapists by allowing their transfers out of maximum security prison is something that the government should have worked to avoid, like they failed with the Terry Lynn McClintock case. This public safety minister, and I mean, if the member looks behind in his caucus, he'll see his caucus cringing. He has the worst record of failure in this government outside of the Prime Minister. How come the Prime Minister, who's in the National Capital Region today, has not informed this?
The honourable.
That was a convoluted question.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should choose what we talk about. If we want to talk about the circumstances that are involved in these horrific crimes and how we can responsibly deal with a correction system that's one of the best and most envied in the world.
All right, I'm going to have to stop that, the honourable minister. The honourable government House Leader from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we talk about these issues, I would suggest that they require enormous sensitivity. And I am concerned that in every question that they're peppering it with partisan commentary and trying to extract political advantage from this situation, Mr. Speaker. I have attempted, as I've talked about this, to talk about the responsibility. We have one of the greatest correctional services systems in the world. It is mired all over the world, and one of its principal tenets is to not interfere with it politically. And so we all rightfully feel outrage about this transfer. We have great emotion about the crimes that occurred, but we need to deal with that emotion responsibly, Mr. Speaker, and make...
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
International students who were victims of unscrupulous immigration agents should not be punished. They've invested everything they have to study in Canada. They've contributed to the economic, cultural, and social fabric of our community. Halting the deportation and removal orders is a good first step. The minister said he's working on a long-term solution. However, what the student needs is a permanent residency status. Will the minister follow up to ensure that an alternate permanent residence pathway is made available to the victims of fraud.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for her question and her advocacy, along with members of this House that come from all parties that are represented in the House of Commons, to find a solution for innocent
This
victims
guy's
who are
just
taken
so
advantage
happy
of
with
by
everybody
fraudsters who allowed them to enter
cooperating.
Canada on the basis of fraudulent letters of admission. Yesterday, we announced a new path forward, including a task force that would give an opportunity for students to demonstrate that they were not complicit in fraud, but in fact were victims of fraud. They will be given temporary status in Canada to allow them to complete their studies or to continue to work. We've also advanced new measures to ensure they could apply for permanent residency or to remain in Canada without prejudice. That is the right path forward to punish.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
The London Food Bank is seeing its highest turnout ever. People just can't afford the cost of food right now, and major grocers are using inflation as a cover to jack up prices. This government is choosing to protect the profits and greed of major grocers while Canadians' bills skyrocket. The multi-partisan committee released a report stressing how a windfall tax will incentivize large grocers to keep prices low. So will this government implement this windfall tax immediately so Canadians can stop going to food banks and actually afford their groceries?
Don't worry. The grocery rebates in the
I
mail.
agree with the member, and we know that Canadians are paying far too much for their groceries right now. This is why, not long ago, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry wrote to the Competition Bureau to make sure that the Bureau is using all of the tools it has at its disposal.
That's even worse.
To keep prices down and to prevent businesses from taking advantage of the high prices.
Never mind, the
profiting
Minister
off of Canadians.
Science
We've also
and
asked the
Technology
Bureau
is
to
looking
look
into it.
immediately into these matters, and will continue to work to make life more affordable for Canadians in all
These
matters.
people are just so bloody
Member for Hamilton
divorced
Mountain.
from reality.
Speaker, around the world, we are seeing the rights of 2S LGBTQIA plus people being restricted, even within our own borders. We are seeing extremist groups callously using innocent trans and non-binary children as political targets.
You are the people using innocent children. You are the people guilty of child abuse. You are the people.
Would the minister share with the House what he said
And at the
to this
softball
international
ass-patting
forum?
questions to
The
boot.
Honourable Minister.
A few days ago, I stood before nations who have attempted to roll back 2S LGBTQI plus rights, and I reminded them that as a gay and married man, I would be jailed or even condemned to death if I happened to have been born in our countries. Nations make progress and they achieve rights in their own time, in their own way, as was the case with Canada, and we respect that. But once those rights are achieved, once they are named, we will not stand by and see them swept under the carpet or put back in the closet or taken away. Not here, not there, not anywhere. Thank you, Mr.
Lather.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles.
At least he was able to stand up today.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his cabinet have never, absolutely never taken responsibility for their many acts of bad faith. For example, as Minister for Public Safety alone has misled this House no fewer than 7 times. He even misled a judge by backdating documents. That alone should have led to his dismissal, but he's still with us today.
Yeah, so be with us forever, unfortunately.
The Liberals have also never shown any sensitivity for the victims of Paul Bernardo. The Prime Minister is in Ottawa. Can he finally tell us that he will dismiss the Minister for Public Safety? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, it is absolutely false. That question is absolutely false.
Oh.
I called representatives.
You are absolutely
of families
false,
of
you
victims
rotund
to
clown.
explain our government solidarity, to express our full support. And now,
You corpulent parrot.
we will work with correctional
All you can do
services
is repeat the
to
talking
avoid
points.
such
You have
examples
not
in
an
the future.
original
We
thought
have
in your little
to
head.
identify victims before making this kind of decision. That is what we will do in the future. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Correctional Services Canada informed the Prime Minister's office 3 months ago that Paul Bernardo was going to be transferred to a medium security facility. Did anyone at the PMO
I mean, this clown should not get away with lying to Parliament over and over and over again. But he does. He gets away with it.
The very first thing to do. The Minister said he did it 2 weeks ago. Why did the Prime
Gross
Minister not do it
incompetence.
3 months ago?
And mendacity.
The Honourable
Sheer
Minister.
mendacity.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to my honourable
probably
colleague,
both.
he does not understand current statutes here in Canada, and these are questions that we have to address. We are ready to work together with all members in this House, but in the meantime, I will be emitting new directives for correctional services to make sure that important things will be done. I will be briefed directly, and that correctional services notify victims when such decisions are made in the future.
For Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, an unsealed Justice Department indictment in U.S. court revealed that a Canadian in Vancouver was coerced back to the PRC. It's been 8 months since the first reports about Beijing's illegal police service stations. Beijing brazenly admitted to 5 of these stations, and another 2 have been identified. These stations are being used to coerce people back to the PRC. The minister has indicated that these stations were shut down, but they haven't been. When will they be?
Watch Mendo misleader.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect
Cover this
to my
one up.
colleague, he needs to listen carefully to the RCMP, who have consistently updated Canadians that they are taking action in regards to foreign interference that are in association with these so-called police stations. If the Conservatives are serious about fighting foreign interference, they will stop with the partisan attacks. They will support the government's agenda to tackle this issue.
Stop asking me to resign.
In a way that is unifying, because we must protect our democratic institutions and, most importantly, Canadians from this phenomenon.
The honourable member for Wellington Hills.
This
Mr.
jackass.
Speaker, that same indictment also revealed that in New York City last summer, PRC agents tried to coerce someone in New York City to come to Toronto for more intensive interrogations. The implication is that Beijing is comfortable using Canada as its foreign interference playground. Maybe that's because 2 months ago, those same PRC agents were arrested. Yet here north of the border, nothing. No arrests, no new legislation. When will the Prime Minister replace this minister with someone who will get the job done?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we are getting the job done by adding new authorities for our national security establishment, by adding $49 million for the RCMP to protect Canadians from foreign interference, by
They'll blow that on the other thing.
a new foreign agent registry.
I'm going to have to break for a second. We're starting to see the volume go up again, and we're hearing individual voices. It's just getting a little bit out of hand, so we're going to take a deep breath and pause a bit. And now we'll ask the Honourable Minister to start from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, we are getting the job done by making sure that we equip our national security establishment with the tools that they need to fight foreign interference, with additional resources for the RCMP, which we put into the budget, and by raising the bar on transparency through the creation of NCCOP and NCIRA, and by continuing to engage Canadians on this. That's what we're doing. What Conservatives are doing are continuing on with an agenda that focuses on partisan attacks. They should stop that and do the work with all members in this chamber so that we can fight against foreign interference and protect our democratic institutions.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, 1,300 people found that they were going to lose their jobs yesterday at Bell Media. 6 radio stations are closing their doors. When even a giant like Bell can no longer protect its media and newsrooms, these are serious times. The entire news industry is under threat, as are the people who make it. The Bloc Québécois is proud to have contributed to C11 and C18 essential bills. I'm sure the Minister agrees that even more needs to be done. In light of these job losses, what is the Minister proposing to better protect the diversity of information? The Honourable Minister for Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, my thoughts are for all those who lost their jobs.
Oh, this is Mr. Censorship.
It's always worrying when there are job cuts and when radios are closed, when journalists lose their job. And that is why we have been here from the very beginning. We have worked with the Bloc Québécois, we have worked with the NDP to put forward C11 and C18, but the Conservatives have done everything to delay it.
Good.
Everything.
Because you're nothing but a goddamn censor.
Do they now understand that their actions have consequences? The Honourable Member.
Your actions have more consequences and much more dangerous ones.
This wave of job costs at Bell proves that there is still pessimism about the future, even among the biggest telecommunications giants. So imagine what is the case for smaller entities. We have to ask ourselves whether the current federal programs and the royalties from C18 will really ensure the survival of our news media. The Bloc Québécois is therefore proposing the creation of a dedicated fund separate from current programs, dedicated entirely to protecting news media and newsrooms. I think that's where we are, Mr. Speaker. What does the Minister think about this? Is he ready to work with us to develop such a fund? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the government is always open to new solutions. We'll always examine what we can do better.
They've already bought off the media. What else can they do?
The Conservatives
and it's
were
still
against
dying.
when we had measures for our various
Despite all the
regions,
government
the
subsidies.
Conservatives were against. And when
All
we
the
passed
money
18
flooding in
reforms, the
to
Conservatives
prop
once
up
again,
the traditional
once again were against.
legacy
They don't
media. It's
understand
still
that
dying,
actions have real
but it's
consequences, Mr.
heavily
Speaker.
subsidized by this
The honourable
government.
member for Mégantic l'Érable.
What else they want?
To demonstrate once again his admiration for the basic dictatorship of the Beijing regime, the Prime Minister wanted to contribute himself to its expansion in 2016 by announcing an amount of $250 million to the Asian Investment Bank. We warned the Prime Minister. We saw that there was a trap. The Conservatives saw the trap. One of the bank's leaders has now stated that it was in fact run by the Communist Party in Beijing. Canadians should not have to pay $250 million for the expansion of the Beijing regime. When will the Prime Minister get our money back? The Honourable Minister for Tourism. Mr. Speaker, like the Deputy Prime Minister stated yesterday, in answer to this question, the Government of Canada will immediately put an end to all of its activities with the Asian Investment Bank. And she asked the Department of Finance to carry out an investigation in Canada's participation with the AIB. We also talk on the matter with our allies. The investigation announced yesterday has to be done as rapidly as possible. No result has been excluded as of yet.
Capel.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal-appointed board member on the Asian Infrastructure Bank just resigned, calling it a cesspool and saying that it was controlled by, quote, the Communist Party crowd who operate like a secret police. Who could have seen this coming? Who could have predicted that a bank structured to give Beijing effective control would use the bank to expand the power and influence of the communist regime in Beijing? Who could have possibly seen that coming? Conservatives, that's who. We warned these liberals not to put tax dollars into the scam of a bank. So when are they getting our money back?
Yes. The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Speaker, as the Deputy Prime Minister said yesterday, and as I said in this House yesterday, related to this matter, the Government of Canada will immediately halt all government-led activity at the bank, and she has instructed the Department of Finance to lead an immediate review of the allegations raised and of Canada's involvement at the AIIB. The Canadian government will also be discussing this issue with our allies and partners who are members of the bank. The review is to be undertaken expeditiously. No outcome is being ruled out following this investigation.
For Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, nobody likes an I told you so, except for everyone who told you so. Yeah. It wasn't just conservatives. It was our major security partners like Japan and the United States and foreign affairs experts who all said the same thing, that the communist regime would use the bank to bully developing countries and expand its power and influence. This bank built railways and ports with taxpayers' dollars while Canadians here at home are struggling just to pay the bills. So now that the con has been exposed, will they do the right thing and get Canadians their tax dollars back?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, same question, same answer as we said yesterday in this House. And as the Deputy Prime Minister has been very clear, we have ceased all government-led activities with the AIIB. We have asked Finance to conduct an immediate investigation into the activities of the bank. This investigation is to be undertaken expeditiously, and no outcome is being ruled out from this outcome.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, countries around the world are racing to seize the extraordinary economic opportunities that come with building a low-carbon economy, investing in clean energy, and scaling new technologies. We must ensure that Canadian workers are equipped with the right skills in the right place.
How the hell did this guy get elected in Calgary?
Can the Minister of Natural Resources please share how this government is helping workers capitalize on this opportunity and ensure Canada is a leader in all
Somebody fed him that question today.
The Honourable Minister.
Oh, it's a great question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for his incredible advocacy on these issues. The global race to build...
Incredible advocacy.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my honourable colleague for the question and for his advocacy on these important issues. The global race to build a low-carbon economy is the greatest job creation opportunity of our time. We can either work to seize this opportunity or we can put our heads in the sand and let it pass us by. Having a serious plan to address climate change is required for a serious plan for Canada's economic future. Today, with the tabling of the Sustainable Jobs Act, our government is choosing to seize the moment. This act will create and maintain jobs in communities across Canada by helping workers gain the necessary skills and training to fill the jobs of a low-carbon world. We are building an economy where Canadian workers and businesses will thrive.
Before going to the next question, I just want to remind the honourable member for Calgary-Middenwood, it's not polite to try to scream over the voice of someone else. The honourable member for King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of this Prime Minister's Liberal government is driving up the cost of living. The more he spends, the more things cost. According to the latest national rent report, average rent for a two-bedroom apartment in King Vaughan is $2,650, the fifth highest in the GTA. Canadians are sick and tired of this government trying to convince them that they've never had it so good. When will this Liberal Prime Minister show some compassion and stop the out-of-control inflationary spending so Canadians can stay in their homes?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are sick and tired of is the Conservative hypocrisy that they care about affordability for Canadians. Right now in this House, they are holding up Bill C-35 and Act on Early Learning and Childcare. There are only 19 minutes left in debate to get this bill passed through this House and to the Senate. They keep saying they care about affordable childcare, Mr. Speaker, but all they have done is play games, partisan games, to hold it up. When will they finally be honest with Canadians and tell them they don't care about it instead of playing these silly games?
The honourable member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, fuel companies throughout Atlantic Canada have sent letters to their customers telling them on July 1st, propane is going up 12 cents a litre, gasoline 17 cents a litre, home heating and diesel 20 cents a litre. Folks from Kentville, Antigonish, Sydney, St. John, Fredericton, Edmundston, Corner Brook, Clarenville, CBS, Lab City, and all over PEI have sent me a copy of their letter. Mr. Speaker, will the evil genius who invented carbon tax, number two, please stand up and tell us why he's persecuting Atlantic Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind the honourable member that the Conservative Party of Canada campaigned on a platform to implement a clean fuel standard, except that they're all words, we're all action, Mr. Speaker. We've worked with companies across the country to ensure that we can have in Canada lower carbon emitting fuels. We're creating investments across the country in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec, Newfoundland of more than $2 billion in the last year alone in clean fuel, Mr. Speaker. We will continue ensuring that we can create good jobs, have a good economy, and tackle climate change.
The honourable member for Coast of Bays Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, what a pile of baloney. Canadians know that all they've done is destroy jobs in Canada. The Prime Minister's childhood friend, and he believes the same thing. Premier Fury says that when he asked the federal minister what impact carbon tax 2 would have, he admitted that it won't be zero. No, it won't be zero. It'll be $850 a year per household in Atlantic Canada. Will these Liberals finally admit that carbon tax isn't working, stop persecuting the people who elected them, and end carbon tax?
Liberals love the carbon tax.
Mr. Speaker, you know, I really find it quite rich when I listen to our colleagues on the other side of the House. I'd like to give you a little history lesson, especially from my part of the country. The first thing we did was reopen the Veterans Affairs Office.
Looks like you are part of the country.
The other thing we did, as a coastal community, they'd closed down the Coast Guard and search and rescue. We built a new facility, we opened it. Then we raised taxes on the wealthiest. We lowered it on the middle class. We lowered taxes for small businesses twice. We've been there to help people through the pandemic. We're there now helping with dental care, with child care benefits, and helping people turn off coal.
The honourable member.
Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. Just shut her off.
recognize that raising awareness is one of the most effective ways to combat elder abuse. With today, June 15th, marking World Elder Abuse Awareness
Well,
Day,
I think we're
Prime
getting near
Minister
the end
Trudeau
here.
provide an update to the House on the steps being taken by this government to increase awareness and prevention in the mistreatment of senior citizens of Canada.
The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from St. John's East for a very important question. Mr. Speaker, any form of elder abuse is a despicable crime, and we take it very seriously. And Mr. Speaker, our government is taking action by supporting over 600 community organizations that help seniors recognize and identify
Trudeau has
fraud
clearly
and
been
abuse.
avoiding,
Mr.
and he
Speaker,
won't
by
be there
finalizing
tomorrow.
a
So I think he's
definition
had
of
one
elder
appearance
abuse,
all week.
by establishing new offenses and penalties
And that
in the
is
criminal code related to elder abuse,
incredible.
by investing in better data collection.
He
and
comes
to
back
ensure
from
that
Ukraine,
tragedies like the ones that we saw in the long-term
basically
care, so that they never
signs
happen
us
again.
up for a
We
war
work
with
on the
Russia,
national long-term care standards and are working
throws
towards
another
delivering
$500 million
a safe long-term care
at
act.
corrupt
Thank you,
Zelensky.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan
Doesn't come to the House of Commons to explain any of it. But mind you, he wouldn't have got any questions from this opposition anyway. Because they're all in lockstep marching towards World War III, unfortunately. And they just don't understand that they're in over their heads.
A day. Chief Jones came all the way to Ottawa to plead with Indigenous Services and Infrastructure Canada to help. Will the minister honor reconciliation and start working with the Pachidat to get this community the school they desperately need?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since this government was elected, we have worked tirelessly to close the gaping infrastructure gap that the previous Conservative government left. In fact, they underinvested in Indigenous children. They
Another
underinvested
winner
in
in the
Indigenous
ranks.
infrastructure. They did nothing about boil water advisories, Mr. Speaker, for a decade, which left a massive gap of infrastructure across the country, including children's schools. Our government has reversed that trend, Mr. Speaker, and of course, I will work tirelessly to make sure that every community
would never work tirelessly because you get tired too fast.
safe to learn in.
The Honourable Member for Spadina Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, on June 10th, Canada seized a Russian aircraft at Pearson Airport. Global Affairs Canada said it's working with Ukraine on, quote, options to redistribute this asset to compensate victims of human rights abuses, end quote.
This guy is one of the
Mr.
few
Speaker,
independents.
why then is the government fighting the families of victims of Flight PS-752 from using an Ontario Superior Court ruling allowing them to seize assets and obtain compensation from Iran? Why is our government protecting a ruthless regime and it's murdering IRGC terrorists? Why are they standing with terrorists instead of grieving Canadian families?
Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an important question, and it gives me the opportunity to talk about two things. First, what we're doing to make sure that the Russian regime is held accountable. Canada is the first country in the world able now to seize and forfeit important assets of the Russian regime. And indeed,
What a
we've
doorknob.
seen the Antonov
Just
plane
walking
that has
into
been
a
stranded
conflict.
at the Pearson Airport. When it comes to Iran, we will continue to make sure that the regime itself is held accountable. We've sanctioned the IRGC, we've sanctioned also key leaders, and we'll make sure that the families of the PS-752, with which I've had numerous contacts and numerous meetings, will make sure that they are compensated and will support it. Thank you.
It's perfectly matched for
That's all the
Justin.
time we have for questions.
Oh, well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that.
For the Honourable Member from Niagara
It was not the best session today, but you can always learn something, that how vacuous the front row of Liberals are and how incredibly reluctant they are to answer any questions, with the exception of talking points. Yeah, that's all they answer. They will respond with talking points. They will not respond to a question. And I think Mendicino was brazenly up on his feet again today, defending himself when he's got no reputation left to defend. It's absolutely outrageous, but this is life in Canada right now. So anyway, until we meet again.